Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Bible in a Year 2021. We are on day 257, and we are really, this is yesterday was the first three chapters of Daniel's life, and these three will be the last three of his life. And then after that, we get into the prophecies and visions that Daniel had. And there's a lot that we have to cover today, so I apologize for the length of this. We'll see how fast we can get through this. So in chapter 4, verses 2 to 3, we have the final testimony of Nebuchadnezzar, and we have to cut out a lot of it, but let's touch on the essentials here. He says, I'm delighted to share the signs and miracles that the Most High God has worked in my life. This is what he sends out to his kingdom, which is really vast. His signs are superb, his miracles so powerful, his kingdom is everlasting, his rule is for all time. Not bad for a king who is a pagan and not part of the Jewish nation, eh? In verse 8 to 9, we see his respect for Daniel. Daniel, who's called Belshazzar, after the name of my God, was the last to come before me. In him is the breath of the holy gods. I told Daniel the dream. Belshazzar, chief of the dream interpreters, I know the breath of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Tell me the meaning of the visions I had in my dream. And this chapter really is also not only his testimony, but it's a good insight into the relationship that he and Daniel had. So we find here in verse 17, this sentence is by the watcher's decree. This decision is the Holy One's word, so that all who live might know that the Most High dominates human kingship. The Most High gives kingship to anyone he wants and sets over it the lowest of the people. That's his entire testimony right there. That's the legacy that he leaves, that he passes on to the people. The Most High gives kingship to anyone he wants and sets over it the lowest of the people. So Daniel, who's called Belshazzar, was shocked for a bit. So he has told him his dream, and Daniel is now like he's just shocked by his understanding of what this dream is. What he thought about frightened him. The king declared, don't let the dream and its meaning scare you, Belshazzar. And then Belshazzar answered, sir, I wish the dream to be for those who hate you and its meaning to be for your enemies. Now stop right there. I don't want to spend too long on here, but here's a fine example for us. Those of us who set up ourselves up as the enemy of the government, enemy of those who oppose us, the enemy, and there's no place at all in God's revelation of any of that. Our example here is Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar is the one who went in and destroyed Jerusalem. He's the one who went in and killed the people. He's the one who went in and sent people into exile. He is fierce. He's evil. He's just and yet here Daniel receives receives the interpretation of the dream. You think he would be rejoicing over this, but no. I wish this was about your enemies. I wish this was for those who hate you. Is Daniel's heart. His heart was for Nebuchadnezzar. His heart was to demonstrate who Yahweh was to Nebuchadnezzar, to be an influence, to serve him so that the king would succeed. And understand when Daniel went into exile, when he came into service to the king, Jerusalem was not destroyed. It was only the beginning. And it was while Daniel was in service to the king that Jerusalem was destroyed. So you think he would have some things against Nebuchadnezzar, but no, here he is really regretting that this dream was something bad. So Daniel's counsel to him, though, in verse 27, after the dream, after talking about how the Lord is going to humble Nebuchadnezzar so that he understands where his power comes from, because he couldn't have done anything that he did if it was not Yahweh that was enabling him. So this is Daniel's counsel. Verse 27, therefore, your majesty, please accept my advice. Remove your sins by doing what is right. Remove your wrongdoing by showing mercy to the poor. then your safety will be long lasting. But, you know, when you're that powerful, when you're that great, when you're that rich, and in order to hold these kingdoms together, he had to be a powerful man. Don't you think for a moment he wasn't. He would have had to have been extremely powerful to be able to succeed. And there's a lot of pride and arrogance that went with it. So we read this in 29 to 31. 12 months later, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon. The king declared, "Isn't this Babylon the magnificent city that I built as the royal house of my own by my own mighty strength and for my own majestic glory?" These words hadn't even left the king's mouth when a voice came from heaven. "You, King Nebuchadnezzar, are now informed. Kingship is taken away from you." And then we have the whole thing that he ends up, he's wild, he's crazy, he's out eating grass with the cattle, removed as king, the whole bit. And then at verses 34 to 35, at the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes to heaven. My reason returned to me, and I praised the Most High. I worshiped and glorified the one who lives forever, because his rule is everlasting. His kingdom is for all time. All of earth's inhabitants are nothing in comparison. The Most High does whatever he wants with heaven's forces and with earth's inhabitants. No one can contain his power or say to him, "What do you think you are doing?" So a little bit of humility has been learned here. And so the conclusion of the matter, verse 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, worship, magnify, and glorify the King of heaven. All his works are truth, all his paths are justice, and he is able to humble all who walk in pride. And that's the last we end of him. That's how the recording of who he is ends. And then in contrast, we go over to chapter 5, verse 1, and we find his son Belshazzar's downfall. I mean, he wasn't king for very long. So King Belshazzar threw a huge party for 1,000 of his princes, and he drank a lot of wine in front of them. Never a good thing. Never a good thing. And so what does he do, intoxicated in this way? So the gold equipment that had been carried out of the temple, God's house in Jerusalem, was brought in, and the king, his princes, his consorts, and his secondary wives drank out of it. They drank a lot of wine, and they praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, using the equipment that had been set aside for service in the temple. Not a good idea. So a hand shows up, does writing on the wall, and right away, Belshazzar knows that something's wrong. The king's mood changed immediately, and he was deeply disturbed. He felt weak, and his knees were shaking. And then we see that he is just paralyzed here with fear. Verse 8 to 9. Then all the king's sages arrived, but they couldn't read the writing or interpret it for the king. At that point, King Belshazzar was really frightened. All the color drained from his face, and his princes were also very worried. And then he's reminded of the fact that Daniel was part of the kingdom and had been a great servant of his father. Verse 11 to 12. There is a man in your kingdom who has the breath of holy gods in him. When your father was alive, this man was shown to possess illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the very wisdom of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed this man as chief over the dream interpreters, enchanters, Chaldeans, and diviners. Yes, your father did this because this man, Daniel, the one the king named Belshazzar, possesses an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight into the meaning of dreams. He can explain ambiguities and resolve mysteries. Now, in light of all that, summon Daniel. He will explain the meaning of this thing. So Daniel is brought in to service to the son of the king. And promises are made. Daniel's, no, thank you. Daniel answered the king, keep your gifts, give the rewards to someone else, but I will still read the writing to the king and interpret it for him. And so it's dealt with. He's reminded of how Nebuchadnezzar humbled himself. And then this is the sin that is revealed in Belshazzar. But you who are his son, Belshazzar, you haven't submitted, even though you've known all this. So it wasn't like he was ignorant. Instead, you've set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. The equipment of God's house was brought to you, and you, your princes, your consorts, and your secondary wives drank wine out of it, all the while praising the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, gods who can't see, hear, or know anything. But you didn't glorify the true God, who holds your very breath in his hand and who owns every road you take. Can you imagine how Belshazzar must feel at this moment? And then the sentence, verse 26 to 28. The sentence is the interpretation here. This is the meaning of the word mean. God has numbered the days of your rule. It's over. Tekel means that you've been weighed on the scales and you don't measure up. Piers means your kingship is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So, and then it happened very swiftly in verses 30 to 31. That very same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. Darius, the Mede, received the kingdom at the age of 62. So here's where the Chaldeans are diminished, and the Medes are now raised up as Darius comes in. Now, right away, Darius recognizes the wisdom that he sees in Daniel. It's mature spiritual wisdom here on full display in verses 1 to 3. Darius decided to appoint 120 chief administrators throughout the kingdom and to set over them 3 main officers to whom they would report, so that the king wouldn't have to be bothered with too much. One of these main officers was Daniel. Because of his extraordinary spirit, Daniel soon surpassed the other officers and the chief administrators, so much so that the king had plans to set him over the entire kingdom. He's getting pretty old here, though. And then we see human nature kick in verse 4. As a result, the other officers and the chief administrators tried to find some problem with Daniel's work for the kingdom, but they couldn't find any problem or corruption at all because Daniel was trustworthy. Could call him righteous. He wasn't guilty of any negligence or corruption. And so they hatched this plan against him. They tricked the king and hatched this plan against Daniel. Daniel is full aware of it, but there's, he's not supposed to pray to anything other than what the king has dictated. And Daniel knows there's only one way to fight this, and he's not going to back down. He's not going to back down from his relationship with Yahweh. So here again is another example of that relationship. People who don't understand attacking that relationship. So when Daniel learned that that document had been signed, he went to his house. Now his upper room had open windows that faced Jerusalem. Daniel knelt down, prayed, and praised his God 3 times that day, just like he always did. Just then, these men, all ganged together, came upon Daniel, praying and seeking mercy from his God. So they've sprung the trap, and the king wants to try to rescue Daniel, but it's too late because of the nature of the kingdom. Verses 14 to 15, when the king heard this report, he was very unhappy. He decided to rescue Daniel and did everything he could to save Daniel before the sun went down. But these men, all ganged together, came and said to the king, "You must realize, Your Majesty, that the law of Media and Persia, including every law and edict that the king has issued, cannot be changed." That's how it was. Once the law went in, it could not be changed. So then, Daniel's going to be thrown into the lion's den by decree. And the king comes to him, and we have to question whether this statement is a statement of faith or of desperate hope. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and hurled him into the pit of lions. The king said to Daniel, "Your God, the one you serve so consistently, will rescue you." And then the king went home, and this speaks again of the relationship that Daniel has with these leaders that he has influence over. Verses 18 and 19, the king then went home to his palace and fasted through the night. No pleasures were brought to him, and he couldn't sleep. At dawn, at the first sign of light, the king rose and rushed to the lion's pit. So they find out that Daniel's okay. Daniel gives testimony about the Lord rescuing him. In verse 23, the king was thrilled. He commanded that Daniel be brought up out of the pit, and Daniel was lifted up. Not a scratch was found on him because he trusted in his God. And then we know his enemies and his enemies' families were thrown into the pit and consumed by the lions. And there it shows again that if you want to look at the lions, just consider this for a moment. The Lord comes down and tells them not to touch this one measly morsel called Daniel. And if they showed restraint, he would pour a great blessing upon them. They showed restraint, listened, up comes Daniel, and down comes this smorgasbord of a meal for them. Kind of grotesque, I know, but that just struck me as I was reading through this today. So in verse 26 to 27, we see the result. And it's another command from yet another king. I now issue this command: in every region of my kingdom, all people must fear and revere Daniel's God, because he is the living God. God stands firm forever. His kingship is indestructible. God's rule will last until the end of time. He is rescuer and savior. God performs signs and miracles in heaven and on earth. He's the proof. He rescued Daniel from the lion's power. An incredible testimony of Daniel's life. And the last statements, which I don't have here, is that Daniel was made prosperous during the rule of Darius, but not only Darius, but the king that followed Darius, the rule of Cyrus, the Persian. So yeah, there's tremendous things to learn here. And no matter where you are, no matter who you serve in righteousness and truth, and you serve to the Lord, and you stay true to him, even if it puts you in a place where you're in disobedience. So Daniel sought the best for these kings, but he wouldn't compromise his relationship with Yahweh for them. That's amazing, isn't it? So that's a lot, but it was very important stuff there, and speaks a lot about our relationship with Yahweh, Yahweh's relationship with us, and what we are supposed to be like in this world. Not adversaries, but influencers. You guys be blessed, be encouraged, and I look forward to spending more time with you tomorrow.